Dr. Maya Johnson's calm, measured steps echoed in the marble lobby of Noblebrook Trust Bank, where her fate would soon be decided by a man who had already written her story before she'd even spoken. As she entered the bank, the soft hum of fluorescent lights above mixed with the muted clatter of keyboards and the occasional murmur of conversations from the tellers behind bulletproof glass. The architecture screamed of wealth, gleaming marble floors, towering windows, and brass fixtures polished to perfection. Yet it all felt strangely sterile, disconnected. Maya, with her simple black hoodie and faded jeans, stood in stark contrast to the polished world surrounding her. She was just another face in a sea of customers, or so they thought. Her heart beat steadily as she approached the front desk. She had done everything by the book, submitted her application for a business loan, documented everything meticulously, even provided references from the U.S. Treasury. But there was something in the air today that felt wrong. She didn't need to read the body language of the customers around her to sense it. She had been here long enough to know when a place like this would look at someone like her and assume they didn't belong. She smiled politely at the receptionist, who barely glanced up from her screen before pointing to the manager's office. "Mr. Carrington will be with you shortly," she said. Maya nodded and walked towards the office. Carrington's office was everything she expected: a display of power and superiority. His desk, polished to a high shine, was stacked with paperwork, each item more important than the next. His chair, behind a high-backed leather seat, seemed to elevate him above the common customer. He looked up when she entered, his eyes scanning her for a brief second before they flicked back to his computer. "Dr. Johnson, I assume?" His voice was dismissive, as though reading her name on the computer screen had been a chore. Maya extended her hand, as she always did in these situations. "Yes, that's me." Carrington barely acknowledged her handshake, instead motioning toward the chair in front of his desk. She sat down, folding her hands neatly on her lap, feeling the cool metal of her portfolio under her fingers. "So I see you're applying for a loan," he began, not looking up from the screen, as though this was some routine transaction. $2.3 million? That's quite a sum." Maya nodded, her posture unyielding. "It's a community development fund, Mr. Carrington. It's designed to assist minority-owned businesses in expanding. The goal is to create economic opportunities for those who have been historically marginalized." Carrington didn't respond immediately. He tapped a pen against the desk and stared at the screen. Maya didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that these moments were often just about waiting for the world to catch up with her. She was about to speak again when Carrington stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the marble floor in a sharp, jarring motion. He shot her a look of distaste as he reached for a bottle of hand sanitizer on his desk, squeezing a generous amount into his palm with exaggerated slowness. "You understand, of course, that loans of this size require collateral, right? People like you don't usually walk into a place like this and ask for millions." The words hung in the air like a slap. Yet Maya didn't let her gaze waver. She remained composed, her eyes steady on his. "I assure you, I've met all the necessary requirements. The paperwork is complete." Carrington's sneer deepened. He swiped his hands together with a slow, deliberate gesture, as though trying to rid himself of the very air she breathed. "We'll see about that." Maya watched him, the calmness of the moment almost unnerving in its intensity. She knew exactly what was happening here. This wasn't about the loan, it never had been. It was about a system designed to limit opportunities for people like her. It was about assumptions made before the first word had been spoken, before the first piece of paperwork had been reviewed. The atmosphere in the room shifted, thickened, as though the air itself were dense with the weight of prejudice. Carrington dropped into his chair, his gaze shifting toward the stack of papers on his desk, as though ignoring her entirely. She could feel the tension mounting with every passing second. From behind the counter, she saw the elderly woman, Mrs. Parker, glance in her direction. Maya gave her a small, reassuring smile, but the woman quickly turned away. She knew why. It wasn't just Maya under scrutiny today. It was the entire idea of who deserved access to financial power. Carrington finally broke the silence. "I'm afraid you're going to need more than just paperwork and ambition to get a loan like this. Banks deal in reality, not charity cases." He seemed to take some pleasure in the finality of his words. But Maya had heard this before. The tone, the dismissal, the attempt to reduce her to a stereotype. She had lived with it all her life. She had learned to turn it into fuel. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Carrington," Maya replied calmly. "I've come here for a business loan, just like any other applicant who meets the criteria." Carrington's hand froze mid-motion as he reached for the file. His eyes flashed briefly toward her, but he quickly averted them. "Well, that's certainly ambitious." Maya remained silent. She knew she had to wait, to let him continue with his theatrics, to let him think this was about the paperwork or her qualifications. But it wasn't. Not really. She had walked into this bank knowing she would be challenged, knowing she would be scrutinized in ways others might never experience. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. Just as Carrington began to look at her file, the buzzing of her phone vibrated softly across the desk. The name flashing across the screen was one she had been dreading to see. U.S. Treasury Debt Director, Robert Douglas. She let it ring through, her eyes still locked on Carrington's back as he finally opened her file. His chuckle was soft, almost mocking. "A community development fund," he muttered, as though the idea was laughable. "Let's see what we have here." He flipped through the pages, stopping at a certain section, and then paused. His brow furrowed, and for the first time, there was something other than disdain in his gaze, something closer to confusion. But Maya didn't react. She knew that look all too well. She had seen it from those who couldn't fathom that someone like her could possess the credentials she held. They had no frame of reference for the quiet power she wielded. Carrington finally closed the folder with a loud snap, his eyes narrowing on her. "You understand," he said, leaning forward, "that loans like this require collateral. You're going to need to provide more than just some government paperwork." A cold silence descended, and Maya felt the weight of the room pressing in on her. She had known this would happen, but now it was time to stand her ground. With a calmness that seemed to pierce the air around them, she replied, "Perhaps you're not familiar with my qualifications. Allow me to refresh your memory." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Mr. Carrington's voice sliced through the tension, his words dripping with disdain. "Do you even understand what kind of collateral is required for a loan of this size?" Maya didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed steady, unwavering, as she heard the sting in his voice, the judgment beneath the surface. This wasn't about the loan, it never had been. This was about his assumptions, his perceptions of who belonged in a place like this, and who didn't. She had long known that this moment would come. The challenge had always been there, lurking beneath every interaction, every polite smile she'd forced herself to give, every condescending glance that passed her way. It wasn't new. And it wasn't just about the loan. It was about the way her presence was always perceived as an anomaly in places like this. Maya thought of the countless times she had walked into corporate offices and felt the eyes of others narrowing on her, appraising her, categorizing her as something less than deserving. She had come to expect it, and in a way, that expectation had become part of her armor. Carrington's words were no surprise to her. The subtle insult, The raised eyebrow, she had seen this before. She had seen it in classrooms, in boardrooms, in places where success was reserved for those who looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, and spoke with a certain level of assumed authority. She had spent years fighting against this undercurrent of systemic prejudice. She knew how to stand her ground when the tide was against her. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just another black woman trying to prove herself in a world that didn't want her to succeed. Today, she wasn't going to accept the usual dismissal. She was ready to expose the truth for what it was. Mr. Carrington continued, his voice growing more insistent as he flipped through the loan application in front of him. "It's not that simple," he said, his words dripping with condescension. "You're asking for more than what your application can back up. No one just walks in here and gets a business loan of that size. There's collateral, assets, proven backing. Do you even know what that takes?" Maya watched him, her eyes never leaving his face. His arrogance was almost palpable, his confidence rooted in a belief that someone like her could never possess the credentials, the assets, or the worth to be sitting here, in this bank, asking for such an amount. He couldn't have been more wrong. She leaned forward slightly, placing her hands gently on the edge of his desk. "I assure you, Mr. Carrington, I meet all the requirements, and I'm here to discuss my loan application with you." Her voice was calm, measured, but there was an unmistakable authority in it that made him pause for a fraction of a second. For the briefest moment, he hesitated. His eyes darted to the screen on his computer, then back to her. He was trying to make sense of her presence, her composure, the way she held herself in a space where people like her didn't belong. The seconds ticked by, stretching like a thin thread about to snap. Then, Carrington's eyes narrowed, a sneer spreading across his face as he sat back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He was regaining control, or so he thought. "Let's get one thing straight," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I don't know what kind of world you come from, but in the real world, loans like this are earned. They don't come from government programs or dreams." Maya didn't react to the sting in his words. Instead, she reached into her portfolio and slid a stack of documents across the desk, placing them in front of him. He stared at the papers for a moment before glancing up at her, a faint frown crossing his face. "Everything you need is right there," Maya said, her tone steady. "The documentation, the proof of funds, the references. You can verify it all." He stared at the papers for a long moment before finally grabbing them with a scoff. "Is this some kind of joke?" he muttered under his breath as he flipped through the pages. Maya remained silent, her gaze unwavering. She had seen this act before: disbelief, dismissal, the way people in power always found a way to ignore what didn't fit their narrative. But she wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not today. His eyes flicked through the papers more rapidly now, but his expression grew more strained, more uncertain. This can't be real," he muttered, his voice tight. "Who are you? What are you really doing here?" Maya didn't give him the satisfaction of responding immediately. Instead, she simply watched him squirm as he flipped through the papers, unable to comprehend that someone like her, someone who didn't fit his preconceived ideas, could be exactly who she claimed to be. And then, his eyes went wide. He stopped flipping through the pages and stared at one document in particular. For the first time since their interaction began, he was silent. The truth had come into focus. Maya saw his jaw tighten, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he turned the document in his hands. He wasn't just seeing papers. He was seeing her credentials. He was seeing the proof of who she was and what she had accomplished. A federal investigator with connections that ran deeper than he could ever understand. His eyes flicked back up to her, and for a moment there was no hiding the look of panic in his gaze. "You're—" he started, his voice faltering. "Yes," Maya replied softly, her voice unwavering. "I am Dr. Maya Johnson, Senior Compliance Officer for the Federal Reserve. I've been observing this branch for the past 41 minutes. The words landed with the weight of a freight train, shaking the very foundation of Carrington's world. His smugness, his arrogance, his assumptions, all of it began to crumble. Maya leaned back in her chair, watching as Carrington struggled to regain his composure. It was like watching someone try to hold on to a sinking ship. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She didn't need to say more. The truth was already in the air between them. Carrington grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling as he tried to dial a number, his face flushing red. The silence in the room was thick with anticipation. The live stream from Leah's phone buzzed quietly in the background, capturing every moment. The bank manager was losing control. And Maya, she was finally ready to take back what was hers. The front door chimed. 2 police officers entered, their presence immediately commanding the lobby's attention. The air, already thick with tension, felt even heavier now. Maya didn't flinch, but Carrington's posture stiffened. He stood abruptly, his face flushing a shade deeper, and shot a look toward the officers. His attempt at composure was as fragile as glass. Maya watched as he stammered, his usual arrogance slipping away under the weight of the moment. The officers, one with a calm and professional demeanor, the other a younger man who appeared slightly overwhelmed by the situation, approached Carrington's desk. Officer Martinez, the more seasoned of the two, spoke first. "We received a call about a possible fraud situation. A black female, approximately 40 years old, attempting financial fraud?" Carrington's fingers gripped the edge of his desk as though it were the only thing keeping him anchored. "Yes," he muttered, his voice unsteady. "This woman is here asking for an enormous loan with insufficient documentation. Maya's voice interrupted him, clear and unshaken. "I've provided all the necessary documents, officer. There's no fraud here, only a mistake, and the actions of one man who has decided to make assumptions about me based on my appearance." She turned toward the officers, her eyes steady. "I've come to apply for a business loan, and I expect to be treated fairly, just like any other customer. Mr. Carrington's actions, however, have been anything but professional." Officer Martinez's gaze shifted from Carrington to Maya. He had heard these kinds of claims before, seen the way people in power could manipulate a situation to their advantage. But there was something in Maya's demeanor, something that told him this wasn't just an ordinary case. The tension in the room was palpable, the gravity of the moment not lost on him. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez began, his tone more measured now, "I'm going to need you to explain your side of the story." Maya calmly explained, her voice carrying the authority that only someone who had worked for years in the Federal Reserve could wield. As she spoke, the weight of her credentials seemed to fill the room. She spoke of her position, her work, and the documents she had presented. She explained, in detail, how she had followed all procedures to the letter, how the loan was designed to help minority-owned businesses, and how she had been treated with disrespect. Carrington's face twisted in disbelief, but he didn't speak. He had no rebuttal. He had made assumptions about her, assumptions that had turned out to be disastrously wrong. The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the soft clicking of Leah Walker's phone as she recorded everything. Her stream had already begun to climb, the viewership spiking as the scene unfolded in real time. Hundreds of comments flooded the screen, and more eyes tuned in by the second. "Is this really happening?" a comment read. "A loan application? This is outrageous." Another followed. "Get his name and badge number. This is insane." Maya felt the weight of the eyes on her, both in the room and from those watching online. But she didn't waver. She had become a vessel for something larger than herself, something that couldn't be ignored anymore. The power of the people who had been watching, the people who had been silenced for so long, was rising. This was their moment too. Officer Johnson, the younger officer, glanced between Carrington and Maya. He seemed uncertain, unsure of how to proceed in a situation like this. He looked at his partner, Officer Martinez, who was already turning the tide. "So," Officer Martinez said, his voice now firm, "you're telling us that this is a misunderstanding?" Carrington opened his mouth to protest, but his words caught in his throat. He had been so sure, so convinced that Maya didn't belong here. He had built an entire narrative around her being a fraud, but the reality was crumbling around him. He had misjudged her, and now the consequences were stacking up. "Let me get this straight," Officer Martinez continued, turning his attention back to Carrington. "You called the police because a woman here for a legitimate business loan doesn't meet your idea of what a customer should look like?" His voice was steady, but the undercurrent of disbelief was undeniable. Carrington looked to his assistant manager, Ben Foster, but Ben remained silent. The room grew even quieter, the weight of the moment suffocating Carrington's arrogance. The power dynamic had shifted, and he was caught in the undertow. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Carrington sputtered, his eyes darting back to Maya. You're just a customer. You don't belong in a place like this." His words stung with venom, a final desperate attempt to reclaim control over the situation. But it was too late. Maya stood, her presence commanding the room. "I'm not just a customer, Mr. Carrington. I'm someone who has been silenced for too long, and today I'm taking back my voice." Her words were calm, but the truth behind them struck like a hammer. Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably, as though he had just been made aware of the weight of what he was witnessing. His gaze lingered on Maya for a moment longer before he spoke again, his voice softening. "I think we need to get some clarity on this. Ma'am, you said you're with the Federal Reserve?" Maya nodded. "I am, and this branch has been under federal observation for 41 minutes. The words hit like a bombshell. Carrington's face drained of color, and for the first time, he realized how deeply he had miscalculated. The sound of Maya's phone buzzing again was almost imperceptible, but she didn't flinch. She didn't need to look at it. She already knew who it was. The FBI had been watching this situation unfold in real time, and now the repercussions of Carrington's actions were about to take shape. Carrington, desperate to regain some semblance of authority, reached for his phone. "I'm calling the cops," he said, his voice shaking. "I'll have you arrested for harassment." His words were a last-ditch effort to salvage whatever dignity he had left. Maya's eyes locked on his, and with quiet confidence, she spoke. "Mr. Carrington, I strongly suggest you reconsider." The room fell silent again, as if the world were holding its breath. The moment of truth was approaching, and it would be Maya's calm resolve that would tip the balance. Carrington's phone buzzed again, but this time he didn't reach for it. His eyes darted from Maya to the officers, and back to his phone, as if trying to find some escape, some way out of the mess he had created. The air in the bank felt like it was compressing, the tension so thick that it seemed to hold everyone in place. Maya's voice, calm and steady, broke the silence. "Mr. Carrington, you've made your assumptions, but I've been patient long enough." She stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. "This is not a matter of your opinion anymore. It's a matter of justice." Carrington's face twisted in confusion, his brain struggling to process the situation. How had it come to this? How had this one woman managed to expose him so completely, so publicly? He had thought he was in control, that the bank and its unwritten rules could keep people like Maya in their place. But now, The weight of the truth was crashing down on him, and he had no way of stopping it. The two officers stood silent, their expressions unreadable. Officer Martinez had a look of realization on his face, as if the pieces were finally clicking into place. Officer Johnson, younger and less experienced, still seemed unsure of what had just unfolded. He glanced at Carrington, waiting for a cue, but none came. Maya stood resolute, her gaze unwavering. She had spent years navigating spaces like this, dealing with the constant undercurrent of prejudice and discrimination that others were too blind to see. But today was different. She wasn't just confronting one man. She was challenging a system that had operated unchecked for far too long. And she knew this moment would be the beginning of something bigger. "I've been observing this branch," Maya continued, her voice unwavering, "for 41 minutes now. And in that time, I've seen more than enough to know what's been going on here. This is about more than just a loan application. This is about systemic bias. This is about the way people like me are treated when they walk into a place like this. And you, Mr. Carrington, are a part of that system." Carrington's face flushed red, his mind racing to find a response, but he could find none. The truth, delivered with such calm authority, was suffocating him. He had no defense. His entire world, built on his assumptions and privilege, was unraveling before him. Leah Walker, still holding her phone steady, had her eyes locked on the unfolding scene. Her stream had exploded, the numbers climbing higher and higher as more viewers tuned in. Maya's words were ringing through the comments section. "This manager is insane. Someone call the news. She's a federal investigator, OMG." The tension in the room had escalated, and now the entire world outside the bank seemed to be watching. The live stream was a window into this moment, one that couldn't be ignored, one that couldn't be silenced. It wasn't just about Maya and Carrington anymore, it was about the system, about the power of the people who had been watching this unfold, people who were now demanding accountability. Carrington's phone buzzed again, and this time he didn't hesitate. His finger slammed onto the screen, dialing the number with trembling hands. "I need the police," he barked into the phone. "We've got a situation here. This woman is trying to pull some scam." He was cut off by the calm voice of Officer Martinez. "Sir, we don't need the police. We need to resolve this now, without escalation." His voice was firm, but not unkind. He was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Carrington hung up the phone abruptly, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His mind was spinning. He had never imagined this would happen, never imagined he would be the one in this position. But here he was, on the edge of professional ruin, caught in a lie he had constructed from his own prejudices. Maya took a deep breath, her next words cutting through the air like a knife. "You've called the police, Mr. Carrington. You've tried to discredit me, humiliate me, all because of how I look and the assumptions you've made. But I'm not leaving this office until you face the consequences of your actions." Carrington's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. The live stream continued to gain traction, and the room's atmosphere shifted again. It wasn't just about the power he had over the bank anymore, it was about the power of accountability. The weight of the situation seemed to finally break Carrington. He sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time, he looked at Maya not as a problem to be dealt with, but as the person who had exposed his deep-seated prejudice. Officer Martinez stepped forward, his tone more authoritative now. "Mr. Carrington, I think it's clear that there's been a misunderstanding here, and this misunderstanding is one that can't be ignored." He turned to Maya, his voice softening slightly. "Ma'am, we'll make sure your side of the story is heard. You won't be treated unfairly here." Carrington's face was pale, and for a brief moment, he seemed to lose any semblance of control. He looked at Maya, then back at the officers, realizing just how much he had miscalculated. But Maya wasn't done. She looked at Officer Martinez, her voice steady. "I appreciate that, but this isn't just about me. It's about the system that allowed this to happen. And I want to make sure it changes." The officer nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on Carrington. "We'll be taking it from here," he said firmly. Carrington opened his mouth to argue, but Maya's voice cut him off again. "No, Mr. Carrington. This isn't something you can talk your way out of. You've been given an opportunity to make it right, and you've failed. Now, we all have to face the consequences." The room was silent once more, the weight of her words hanging in the air. And for the first time, Carrington realized that the consequences of his actions were far greater than he could have ever imagined. The helicopter's rotor blades sliced through the air as it landed outside the bank. Federal intervention had arrived. The distinct thrum of the helicopter's blades grew louder as it approached, the vibrations reverberating through the marble floors of the bank. Customers who had been watching the scene unfold now turned their heads, some startled, others transfixed by the realization that the situation was no longer just about a loan application gone wrong. It was about something far bigger, something that would send ripples through the entire system. Maya stood unmoving in the center of the lobby, her presence the calm in the storm. She had already made her stand. Now it was time to let the powers that be do their part. Carrington, on the other hand, was a man undone. His arrogance had evaporated under the weight of reality, and now all he could do was sit at his desk, staring blankly at the papers in front of him, unable to speak. The door opened again, and in stepped President Robert Chen, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys and Chief Legal Counsel Sarah Kim. His usual poise was shattered, his face pale, his body tense. He strode toward the center of the lobby, where Maya stood, her hands folded in front of her with quiet dignity. Carrington looked up at the sight of his superior, and his face contorted with a mix of embarrassment and fear. "Maya," President Chen began, his voice faltering slightly. "I cannot express how deeply sorry I am about this incident." Maya didn't flinch. She had known this moment would come too. She had anticipated the apology, but it wasn't enough. Words were easy. What mattered was what happened next. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice steady, "your apology is noted, but we're beyond words now. It's time for action." Chen swallowed hard, glancing at Carrington before returning his gaze to Maya. He had never imagined his bank would come to this, would be exposed as a breeding ground for bias and systemic prejudice. He had built his career on maintaining the bank's reputation, on keeping the flow of business unimpeded by such inconveniences. But now, standing in the lobby of his own branch, he realized how fragile his empire truly was. Maya, as though reading his thoughts, continued, "What happens next is up to you. Your bank is under federal observation now, and you'll be held accountable for every instance of discrimination that has taken place within these walls." Carrington's eyes widened, his breath shallow. He had always been untouchable, a cog in the machine of a larger, established system. But Maya had shattered that illusion, and now the consequences of his actions were barreling toward him at full speed. "We'll need to talk about how to remedy this," Chen said, his voice shaking with a rare note of vulnerability. "Your bank has been violating the Equal Credit Opportunity Act for years," Maya replied, her voice firm. "And now the federal government is involved. This will be handled with full transparency, Mr. Chen. There will be no backtracking, no PR spin." Chen nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I understand," he murmured, clearly defeated. "We'll comply. We'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Maya's eyes narrowed as she looked at the stack of papers in her hands. She could almost feel the weight of history pressing down on them. This wasn't just about one man or one institution. This was about the countless people who had been silenced, the ones who had been denied opportunities and treated like they didn't belong. And today, she was taking a stand for all of them. As she glanced over her shoulder, she saw the employees in the lobby, some nervous, some afraid, but all silently bearing witness to the unfolding transformation. She had already won this fight, but the next phase was just beginning. This wasn't just about one moment of confrontation. It was about the long process of rebuilding trust, of instilling accountability in a broken system. What will happen now? Carrington's voice broke through her thoughts, his question laced with fear. Maya took a slow, deliberate step toward him. First, your career ends here, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. The actions you've taken, the way you've treated me, and the way you've treated others, those actions will not be swept under the rug. You will be held accountable, Mr. Carrington. Carrington's face turned an even deeper shade of red, his mind scrambling to come up with a defense, but the words were stuck in his throat. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He had no response to the truth standing before him. Maya, please, Chen said, his tone pleading now. We'll do everything you ask. We'll review the loan applications, the documents, everything. Please, just let us fix this. Maya looked him in the eye, her gaze unyielding. This goes beyond fixing things with paperwork. This is about a fundamental shift in how you operate. You can no longer turn a blind eye to the discrimination happening in this branch. The federal government will oversee everything. You'll make the necessary reforms now. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the helicopter still hovering outside. The reality of the situation had settled in, and the weight of it was heavy. Carrington had been the face of this broken system. But Maya, she was the agent of change. She turned to Officer Martinez, who had been standing quietly nearby. Officer, I'd like you to take a formal statement from Mr. Carrington. Document everything he's done today. This won't be the last time we speak. As the officer stepped forward to begin the formal process, Maya turned back to President Chen. You'll have 72 hours to submit your compliance plan. We'll be conducting a full review of all loan denials from the last 2 years, and I'll personally oversee the implementation of a community development fund. You're not getting out of this, Mr. Chen, but you do have a chance to make things right. Chen nodded, his face pale but resolute. We'll comply, he said softly, his voice filled with regret. Maya stood tall, her gaze sweeping the lobby once more. She had taken the first steps toward something far bigger than just this one institution. This was the beginning of a movement. And it was just getting started. The helicopter's rotors whined as they started up again, a low hum that seemed to shake the very walls of Noblebrook Trust Bank. Outside, the first whispers of dusk began to touch the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. In the lobby, however, time felt suspended. The moment was still, but charged with the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was about to unfold. Maya stood at the center of it all, her posture unwavering. She had started the day as just another customer in a bank that didn't expect her to succeed. Now, she was the one holding the reins, a federal compliance officer and a catalyst for change. The power that had once been wielded over her, over people like her, was crumbling under the weight of her quiet resistance. Carrington, still seated behind his desk, looked like a man who had been broken. His earlier bravado, his mocking laughter had evaporated, replaced by the raw reality of his situation. He was facing more than just the consequences of his actions. He was facing a reckoning with a system that had been built on the backs of people like Maya. President Chen, on the other hand, had a different expression. Fear, yes, but also something else. There was the realization that this wasn't just a one-time incident, something that could be swept under the rug. The weight of Maya's actions, of the federal investigation that was now firmly rooted in this branch, was sinking in. Behind him, his legal team stood silent, their faces unreadable. Sarah Kim, the chief legal counsel, had been watching everything unfold with quiet detachment. But Maya knew she had seen this look before. It was the look of someone who was calculating, someone who understood the cost of what was happening, but also knew the price of silence. Maya broke the silence first, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Chen, I've given you 72 hours to present a plan for reform. I trust that you understand the gravity of the situation." She didn't need to look at him to know that his mind was racing, calculating the steps ahead, trying to figure out how to salvage what he could. "I understand, Maya," Chen replied, his voice low but steady. "We'll comply. We'll make the necessary changes. This cannot happen again." His words held more weight now, more sincerity. But Maya knew that words, however well-meaning, weren't enough. She had seen too many promises like these broken. Actions, real, tangible change were the only thing that could make a difference now. "I'm glad to hear it," Maya said, her gaze never wavering from his. "But let's be clear, this isn't just about this branch. This is about an entire system that's been built to exclude people like me. People like us." Her eyes swept across the room, making sure everyone in the lobby understood the implications of what was happening. "You're not just fixing a single wrong, you're changing an entire culture." The room grew quiet as the truth of her words settled in. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly what she meant. This wasn't just about one man's prejudice. It was about a system that had allowed that prejudice to thrive. For too long, people had been dismissed, ignored, and silenced because of who they were or where they came from. Carrington shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands now clenched into fists on the desk. He had heard this kind of talk before, but never had it been directed at him. Never had it been so undeniable. Maya didn't take her eyes off him. "You'll be removed from your position, Carrington," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is not negotiable, and your actions will be documented in full. You will face the consequences of your choices." Carrington's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, he seemed to realize the enormity of what he had done. His career, his reputation, his entire life as he knew it gone in an instant. And for what? Because he had thought that he could perpetuate the same old injustices that had been normalized for years. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Carrington stammered, his voice weak. Maya's expression softened just slightly, but the power in her voice didn't waver. "It doesn't matter whether you meant for it to happen or not. The damage is done, and now you have to face the consequences." Chen, realizing the magnitude of what was happening, stepped forward. "Maya," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll do what it takes. We'll get the resources, the training, the auditing systems in place. This will never happen again." Maya nodded slowly, but there was no hint of gratitude in her eyes. "We're past the point of apologies, Mr. Chen. What matters now is what you do, what you change." She turned her attention back to the room, to the customers who had been watching this entire ordeal unfold. Her gaze lingered on Mrs. Parker, the elderly woman who had stepped up earlier, speaking out when it seemed like no one else would. Maya gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of her courage. And then, as if on cue, the door to the bank opened again, and 2 more officers entered. This time they were followed by a team of federal auditors, their faces unreadable, their movements swift and purposeful. The federal presence was undeniable now. The system that had enabled Carrington's behavior was about to be torn apart, piece by piece. Maya stepped aside as the auditors moved into the space, their presence commanding the room's attention. Carrington's face was ashen now, his eyes darting between the officers and the auditors. He was trapped, caught in a web of his own making, and there was no way out. "I want to thank you all for your patience today," Maya said, turning towards the crowd. "But this is just the beginning. We're going to do more than just change one bank. We're going to change the way institutions like this operate, and we're going to do it by holding them accountable." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "This isn't just about making sure people like me get their loans. This is about ensuring that no one, no matter who they are, who they love, or where they come from, is ever treated the way I've been treated today." Her voice rang out in the silence that followed. It was a declaration, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been wronged by the system. The journey of Dr. Maya Johnson through Noblebrook Trust Bank was one that began in quiet dignity and ended in profound transformation, not just for herself, but for the entire system that had tried to keep her in the shadows. At the outset, she entered a place that viewed her as an anomaly, a woman of color seeking a loan that, in their eyes, was beyond her reach. The cold marble floors and polished brass fixtures of the bank didn't just symbolize wealth. They stood as barriers to her, barriers built on years of systemic prejudice that she would soon expose. The injustice she faced was not just personal, it was systemic. Mr. Thomas Carrington, the bank manager, was a man who had been trained by society's prejudices to see people like Maya as lesser, undeserving of the same opportunities afforded to others. He had viewed her through a lens tainted by assumptions, not just about her ability, but about her worth. His actions, though rooted in personal bias, were compounded by the institution he represented, a place where such bias was allowed to thrive under the guise of policy. Yet Maya never wavered. From the moment Carrington dismissed her with his sneers, from the first condescending remark he made about her application, she remained unshaken. Her strength was not in the loudness of her words or the fury of her actions, but in the quiet, unyielding power of her presence. She knew what it was like to be overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed, but she also knew that dignity wasn't something that could be taken from you unless you allowed it. Maya's calmness in the face of such humiliation became her weapon, and as the hours passed, it became clear that what she had wasn't just resilience. It was a defiance that reached beyond the individual to challenge the very system that had allowed such injustices to fester. The pivotal moment came when Maya revealed her true identity, when she unmasked herself as a federal compliance officer, a woman who held the weight of the law, the truth, and the moral high ground. The shift was immediate and undeniable. Carrington, who had felt untouchable, found himself powerless. His attempts to humiliate Maya now exposed the depths of his ignorance, his assumptions, and the very prejudice that ran like poison through the bank's culture. But it wasn't just Carrington who was exposed, it was the entire system that allowed him to thrive. It was the quiet, insidious bias that had been woven into the fabric of the institution, a bias that Maya had come to dismantle piece by piece. The power of Maya's confrontation wasn't just in the moment of revelation, it was in the aftermath. The live stream, the growing public outcry, the federal intervention, all of these things combined to strip away the comfort that such institutions had once enjoyed. The consequences of Carrington's actions were not just personal, his behavior had brought to light the widespread inequalities within the banking system, and now there would be no escaping the truth. The federal investigation, the audits, the calls for institutional reform. These were not just responses to one man's mistake, but a recognition that the entire system needed to change. And that change was not going to happen without real accountability. For Maya, The victory wasn't just about exposing one man's prejudice. It was about showing the world that there was another way. She embodied the quiet strength of those who have been wronged, those who have been forced to navigate systems stacked against them, and yet still rise above. She proved that confronting injustice doesn't always require shouting, it requires standing firm, speaking truth, and demanding that the world see you for who you truly are. The lesson here is simple yet profound. There is a difference between superficial policy and genuine human respect. Institutions may create policies that claim fairness, but those policies mean nothing if they aren't backed by the fundamental respect every person deserves. Carrington believed that his bank's policies could shield him from the consequences of his actions, but he learned that true justice comes from the people who are willing to challenge those policies when they are rooted in prejudice. The courage it takes to confront not just a person, but a biased system, is immeasurable. It requires not only the strength to stand alone in the face of ridicule, but the wisdom to know that real change comes from within, and that change starts with those who dare to speak out. Maya's journey wasn't just about her victory. It was about setting a precedent for others, showing them that they too could stand tall in the face of injustice. As she looked around the now quiet lobby, she knew this wasn't the end. It was a beginning one that would echo in the halls of every institution that thought it could perpetuate prejudice in the shadows. The work was far from over, but the foundation for change had been laid. The philosophy remains. Dignity is not a privilege granted by others. It is a right that belongs to everyone. If you've ever witnessed or experienced injustice, remember this story. It's not just a story of one woman's fight, but of all of us coming together to make sure that no one is ever made to feel less than they are. Share this story, like this video, and if you believe that one person can make a difference, leave a comment with number 1. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, stories of quiet power overcoming systemic oppression. Your courage could inspire someone else to stand up. Your voice matters.